echo the sentiments of the senator from Vermont. He is right. The Republicans are wrong on this issue, on every single part of this debate. Senator Sanders is right. The Republicans are wrong. We're in the middle of an unprecedented crisis in our country. We have a health care crisis. We have an unemployment crisis. We have a hunger crisis. We have a housing crisis. We have an addiction crisis. We have a moral crisis in this country. The United States government should be responding to the needs, to the desperation of families in our country at this time. There's a crisis of faith that the American people have in its government's ability to respond to human suffering. Well, this institution has been created to respond to human suffering. That's our job. Tony Fauci has made it very clear that the worst of the pandemic is ahead of us, not behind us. We know what's coming, and yet we are not responding. We know this is not going away soon, and yet we are not responding. A program, Operation Warp Speed, was created to create a vaccine. But because for 7 months the Republicans have refused to fund the public health system of our country at the state and local level, we have Operation Snail Speed to put the vaccinations in the arms of the American people. It was anticipatable. Tony Fauci and others were warning us back in May, in June, in July. There would be a second wave, and the second wave could be bigger. We got the warning. The Republicans refused to heed that warning. And here we are now without the public health infrastructure to deal with the overflow capacity in emergency rooms and ICUs all across the country, while simultaneously asking those same medical institutions to put vaccinations in the arms of healthy people without the resources provided by the federal government to help those states and local communities to deal with that crisis. Sometimes Daniel Patrick Moynihan would say that when you deal with an issue, you deal with it with benign neglect. If you don't want to help or you don't want to hurt, deal with benign neglect. What's happened with the Republicans this year is that they've created a program which is designed neglect. It's an actual plan not to provide the funding, not to provide the help for those families, for those communities, for those institutions that are now being overwhelmed and asked on top of that to put this extra burden of putting vaccinations in people's arms, but without the extra resources. And what do? On the Republican side, they throw out these red herrings, so many red herrings that you need to build an aquarium in the well here of the Senate in order to deal with all of them, that gets away from the central issue. Yes or no, up or down, will you provide $2,000 to Americans who are going to need it through what Tony Fauci is saying will be the worst part of this pandemic? Yes or no, up or down, where do they stand on this issue? Here's what we do know. Republicans seem more focused on funding the Defense Department than they do funding the defenseless in our country. And Americans are becoming more defenseless as each day goes by. The headlines are screaming that this panic that is absolutely understandable and based upon fact is sweeping our country. There is protection which the federal government should be providing to these families. We hear it. They're hungry. They could be without their homes. The addiction crisis is rising. They need help in their families. So from my perspective, we have a moment in time. And Donald Trump happens to agree with us, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And we do agree with him. He is right. We do need this help, which we should be providing to these families. And as we watch more and more of our American loved ones fall sick and die, families are facing a new and unprecedented hardship. They're having to make impossible decisions to whether to put food on the table or keep the heat on through the cold winter months. And the United States government has an obligation to help working people who, through no fault of their own, are seeing all of the things that they care about, all of the success that they have worked for, and all the financial security they've earned be washed away. And yet the Republicans want to put another Operation Snail Speed in place. The damage to these families is anticipatable. We can see what is unfolding. Dr. Fauci is telling us we're at the worst part of the pandemic and it's going to continue. So let us act in anticipation. Louis Pasteur used to say that chance favors the prepared mind. That is what Dr. Tony Fauci is telling us. Let us prepare. Let us help families prepare for what is about to arrive. Just in Massachusetts alone, 21,000 new people applied for unemployment insurance in the week before Christmas. Food banks across Massachusetts, across the country, are seeing double-digit increases in demand with families who never faced food insecurity before. People are literally starving, cold, and without homes. And meanwhile, the majority leader and Republican leadership would rather head home for the new year and ignore the financial and health crises that are taking a toll on our families. For millions of Americans, this will be a New Year's holiday where they won't know if they can put food on the table that night. Republicans are claiming that giving $2,000 in direct cash payments to working Americans would be too expensive, that it would inflate our national deficit, that our budgets are already bloated. I have to ask, though, where was this outrage when Republicans blew up our national deficit to give a $1.5 trillion tax cut to billionaires and corporations? These are the crocodile tears from the right as Americans are shedding real tears, thinking about where their next meal will come from. The eviction notice on the front door, or losing health care in the midst of this crisis. And Americans are actually tired of being told that $600 is, quote, sufficient as an amount of money, as relief, as billionaires receive their tax breaks and grow their wealth by the trillions of dollars during this crisis. The rich get richer, and the rest are there, left suffering. They've had enough of being told that there just isn't the money for support for the well-being of their communities when they can see tax breaks going to those companies that are actually laying off workers. And Americans are tired of being let down by their government time and time again as Donald Trump and his Republican allies have abandoned them during this response to the pandemic. Americans need support. They need to be able to trust their government, and they need $2,000 now. So that's the issue. Yes or no, up or down, on providing $2,000 to Americans to help them make it through the worst part of this crisis. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at 12:30 p.m. on Thursday, December 31st, the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 9051, a bill to provide $2,000 direct payment to the working class, that the bill be considered read a third time and the Senate vote on passage of that bill without intervening action or debate. And further, that if passed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and that immediately following the vote on H.R. 9051, the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the veto message on H.R. 9395, that the Senate immediately vote on passage of the bill, the objections of the President to the contrary notwithstanding, with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.